After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Hey everyone, welcome to Greenhouse Gaslighting, the show where we reject conventional wisdom in favor of common sense. Or will we? I'm your host, Adi, and just like you, I have no idea what's going on either. On January 6th, it was my birthday. And I was trying to figure out what to do for dinner in the middle of a pandemic. Not often that you have a pandemic birthday. And I had been planning to start this show for a minute, and I wanted to talk about the whole debacle with should Pelosi speakership be tied to a Medicare for all floor vote, yada yada, and well, you guys saw what happened. And today, I got my friends Ryan, Zack, and Gabby to talk about the storming at the Capitol and the online discourse that's popped up around it. So in like the hours ensuing, I saw a lot of bulletins of like what just happened, the strange characters we saw. There was like what, the guy with the horn hat. There was Florida man number 120. There was, and then in addition to that, you had a lot of people trying to equivocate last summer's BLM protests with this, and how on one side you had the imagine if the protesters were X, would they have gotten away with it? And it was met with this really weird response of, well, you guys got to do it, what's wrong with us doing it? And the increasing number of posts I've seen are about, we can't normalize this, we gotta call them out. And you guys have kind of seen what's erupted in the wake of this. So what's your immediate reads?
You want any of us to go first, Adi?
Oh shoot. Whoever wants to. I was just planning on taking it organically.
Sure, I'll go. This is Zack, by the way. So in terms of what our immediate reactions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think with any of these weird democracy testing events, my first reaction is some sort of like humorous disbelief, and I don't know if that's healthy or not, but I seem to think things are less serious than they are until the gravity of it, the videos, pictures, fatalities start to come in, and then it's clearly way more serious. I have a real problem, I think, in general with any one side, but especially the side, quote unquote, here that we're going to talk about, of Trump's ardent supporters who were in that mob, denying reality. Not just believing something with absence of evidence, which is a problem in and of itself, but believing something despite evidence, overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Free and fair election, Trump lost. Even the vast majority of every side, every political side believing that, there are still enough people willing to deny reality that causes a major problem. And I don't know if that touches on exactly what you want me to, but that was kind of my initial take on the situation.
Yeah, I kind of want to. So this is Gabby. Hi. Zack mentioned something about this humorous disbelief, and I think I feel that too, whether it's healthy or not. But I also feel there was like a state of numbness, I think. Hearing that initially, I heard it on NPR. NPR was reporting on it, and I was listening to the radio. And it just felt very surreal. And it also felt very familiar at the same time, which was a really uncomfortable space to be in, where I didn't feel shocked, but I also felt like it wasn't real at the same time. In terms of people's responses, I almost feel like we saw this moment of like collective processing, but because we have social media now, right, this is a really big event. And we've had big events obviously happening all of 2020 and before that, but I feel like this was so cataclysmic, right? Like they're storming the Capitol. Like, that's huge. And so everyone was trying to process all at one time. So that evening, that Wednesday into that Thursday, felt very, you had people having a knee-jerk reaction, posting on social media, and then immediately spreading that, and then people with their same knee-jerk reactions doing the same thing. And it resulted in a lot of this denial that like Zack was kind of referring to on the ardent Trump supporter side, right? Which felt very, again, surreal. Like, it just felt like it really magnified how we're not all in the same state of being. Like, not all of us are seeing things in the same way, and I think we've always known that, but this really shone a light on that in a way that I don't think had been prevalent until, last week. Like, it was happening, but this felt like a culmination of all the things. So it was surreal but familiar at the same time. It's kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of thought that with them calling it for Biden, it would be a smooth road from there. And I guess we all kind of collectively didn't see this coming.
You called it would be smooth, maybe, but I knew that. I guess my name's Ryan.
At some point, yeah.
Yeah, my name's Ryan, by the way, for the listeners. So for me, like, I've just been sweating every single step of this process, and I knew that something was going to happen on that day because they were certifying results. It really was kind of like the last step of the whole thing, short of the inauguration, which is not when I'm expecting the next shit show to go down. But for me, I guess immediately when it was happening on the 6th, I was actually at work. I worked for a local government, and I had the job of alerting all my coworkers to the incident. So I immediately kind of fell into sort of a messenger role, just spreading the information of armed insurgents have taken the United States Capitol, or have laid siege to the United States Capitol. And that is never news that I ever thought that I would have to deliver, but I'm not surprised that I had to deliver. Because, and Gabby and Zack, you both touched on this. It is very possible to be shocked by something, but not surprised by it. And if nothing drives that home, then more than what happened on that day, Wednesday. But yeah, I mean, at the risk of rambling, it's not a fun place to be in, being the messenger, just delivering news to people and seeing their reactions, delivering it to my bosses who are like, decently high up in a local government. The local government in theory then has to, just be aware. Heaven forbid the federal government did fall. What happens to the local governments and whatnot? So yeah, just being a mess is not fun. And it was a lot of stress, but I'm not surprised by anything that's taken place thus far. Nothing surprised me in the slightest.
Okay, and everyone can keep their mics unmuted if that's easier, just because we can keep it organic.
Yeah, I wanted to give I wanted to give Gabby and Zack the chance to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I hope it didn't get lost in like me talking too quick. But I don't know if it's like healthy to have the response I did, but when I saw some of it go down, I guess it didn't click that like, oh, it's actually happening and people, this is a serious thing. I kind of just saw it go down, and I've kind of gotten used to the Trump base kind of just going off and doing whatever they wanted.
You get used to shocking things when the world keeps throwing shocking things at you.
Right, but it's like the Capitol protests in like the wake of like in Michigan in like the peak of COVID, and they had to introduce that first round of restrictions, and people are over there like, God damn it, when are you gonna open up the Applebee's? I need to yell at the waitress. I haven't yelled at a waitress in a week. You gotta let me go. And it just. I guess like to me, I initially read it as okay, this is just a little tantrum, but then like you look at some of the clips that came out of that, and you actually see like a bit of a confused response from Capitol Police. Like, okay, we all saw the clip of the one guy who opened it, but then I saw like guys in the halls like confused about what to do. A lot of them were being chased, and it's confusing, and I don't think we're gonna get.
We do. There's an angry mob coming. Should we try to stop them? No, I think we should just move.
But and that's the thing is like there's a lot of rumors, like because that's what social media is good with. It's good with creating rumors, and that's what I'm trying to say. It's like we're not going to get the official story for a bit. We might not ever get it, to be honest.
Before we and I share the opinion that there's a lot of ambiguity that needs to be investigated there, and perhaps a failed response. But there are so many moving parts, and I know, Ryan, you know this from local government. That's before law school. That's my field too. There are in police departments, local police departments, mutual aid agreements. There's several different neighboring jurisdictions who sign these mutual aid agreements, knowing that if something, catastrophic happens, like a mob storming the Capitol, that any one police department's capabilities to respond is not going to be sufficient. So you have all these other, so like the neighboring counties, neighboring jurisdictions have to mobilize and get there. And I'm wondering if that played a part, the delay in getting these mutual aid jurisdictions over to the setting rendered the Capitol Police heavily outnumbered. I also wonder if that picture or that video with the gate being opened, seemingly by a police officer, was them opening the gate so that the mob, which was at that point seemingly a political protest, could get into a publicly accessible area. Because we only see one angle of it. I have no idea where that is in the mall. So there's several questions, and I'm hesitant to throw so much criticism on an outnumbered local police force who might have less than 200 people there versus thousands of people. So they seemed outmatched.
That was the rumor I was going to get into, is that apparently there was an order from the top for DC police to be a little softer, but that's unsubstantiated. That's just what I heard.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor actually not to spread in terms of like left, I guess, social media discourse, right? But also on the right. Like I've seen people sharing things, saying something to the effect of like, these officials were in with Antifa and that's why they ordered them to open it, so it looks bad. And it's this kind of wildly unsubstantiated, like you said,
but isn't that
claims
like the craziest...
that are happening on both. Yeah, like it's a wild thing.
But that's the craziest part about this, is like they'll do it and then they'll be like, hey guys, it was Antifa up there, and that would be like the dumbest feeling, like as one of those guys, to go there on behalf of Trump, the alt-right or whatever group you're with, and then for people on Twitter to say you were an Antifa actor.
Right. Well,
it's so convenient that you can just this amorphous group that doesn't really have a formal structure apparently is at every major event, and you can blame them whenever it seems like your side is
right. And it doesn't help that you have actual elected officials like Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama or Matt Gaetz from Florida who are actively saying,
God, Matt Gaetz, that
I hate Matt Gaetz' stupid little face, but that's not important in this discussion. But you have politicians who are actively spreading lies and misunformation. They know how social media works.
Well, it's not just politicians at that point, because if you get to even like the past BLM protests of last summer, or even now, like people throw around terms that don't really apply, like anarchist, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I did not see a single anarchist there. An anarcho-capitalist maybe, but terms have meaning, and they get taught. Or populist, like the term populist has been used like increasingly lately as a reference to right-wingers when it doesn't really have that connotation historically. So like it's not just elected officials, but even in established media or even on social media, it's like the frivolous use of terms, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It's trying to create what I see, at least, as this kind of push against from extremism of any kind, or non-establishment thought as any kind, and like there's an accepted center that gets to hold the levers of power. And I think
there's also
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that in terms of terms and definitions and things of that nature, like I think we also see with social media, so getting on the whole social media piece, right, where people, there isn't a strict definition for a lot of these things. And I think we know that, and social media, it's constantly morphing, it's constantly changing. And so you can have a post where, like, this example is that one of these Antifa related posts, right? Saying it was Antifa. And it was really wild to me to read, okay, Antifa did this. And then this person in the same post saying, yeah, on their website, I've seen a picture of this guy. And I'm like, but if it's an underground political activism organization that's creating terrorism, why do they have an accessible website for you as a regular person to be able to access? Like, that doesn't make sense. But I don't think it necessarily stems from like a space of like, I mean, that person's not critically thinking about what they're sharing, right? But I also think there is a piece of it where my understanding of what they think Antifa is might be different from what someone else thinks it is, because there isn't a strict, clear definition of what it really means, right? And that's a problem. And this is not just Antifa's one thing, but there's a ton of these examples where people use words on the internet and they're not saying the same thing.
Well, I think
it's almost like they're saying, oh, well, it's the Illuminati. I mean, it's like the new Illuminati, but some far left, I don't know, organization that no one really supports.
Well, I mean, and there's that basis of like, it's this other group controlling the levers in front of you, whether it's Q or Antifa secretly organizing some of this. But even then, like, the nebulous definition stuff happens with some spaces, like not knowing what the alt-right is or what Q is. And it kind of leads to, I mean, on the right, we see this kind of misinformation being used to demonize or antagonize. And with left media, what I see is, the alt-right and QAnon, for instance, they get propped up as boogeymen at a point. And I'm not saying that, you should always sympathize with people, or that, you have to always engage people in good faith, even if they're not going to engage you in good faith. But
thinking critically is always important.
Oh, of course you should think critically. I'm not denying that. Think critically, but reject conventional wisdom. That's my motto. But where I'm going with this is, I think the alt-right was kind of viewed as like this hyper chaotic enemy when, it's still a little nebulous, it's still a little loosely organized. And I think that, a lot on the left, we were instructed like, you got to be afraid of these guys. And I'm like, some of them for sure, but why is it that every dough-faced guy carrying a Gadsden flag is someone I have to be existentially terrified of? Because let's say, you do take we have to fight these people and take it seriously narrative to its natural extent. Well, how are you supposed to do that if this person always has a institutional edge against you, but you have to oppose them? Like, you're just creating anxiety with stuff like that. And I think that some of this language that gets used, it's in a libidinal sense of like trying to express your powerlessness. And I think that's where a lot of us are, is, always having a post about things, always needing to have a reaction to something. And like, this is what you got to do. You can't normalize it, or so on and so forth. I think a lot of people want to earnestly act. I'm not denying that, but I think we're using social media to express that powerlessness, and by having an eloquent post, you kind of feel like you did something, when really I think you've just expressed your powerlessness comfortably into a post. That's my reading.
I think that's a very astute observation. And I've thought this way for at least the past couple of years. It seems like when anything happens, I don't know if this is the starting point, but it felt like a starting point for me when the tragedy, I think it was the Charlie Hebdo thing.
Oh, the Paris thing, and everyone had the Paris flag.
Paris thing, and everybody put the Paris flag. It almost, you have to be careful. Like, and I mean, of course, I participated in that and several subsequent things, so I'm by no means perfect. Sometimes there's a time and a place to, express outrage, condolences, solidarity, that sort of thing. But it almost seems like every month there's something you have to, participate in socially. It almost starts to become a ritual, and you got to be careful of being sucked in. Lately, I mean, you guys know I shared the outrage, about the Capitol mob and storming and insurrection and all the words that are used. But on social media, I've largely kept silent about it because everybody else has said exactly what I'm feeling. Some people say things that I don't agree with, but a lot of people have already said, I feel like I'd just be preaching to the choir. I'd just be adding my my thoughts in a long stream of thoughts that already have been said.
Well, it's a catch-22 because if you don't post about it, the other side's going to post about it. So it's like you need a like.
Well,
I guess Adi, you and I had a conversation.
We did, and I'm hoping to have that in better faith because just it was first of all when you have that in a DM, like it's easier as a DM because it's 1-to-1. If you do it in a group chat, there's a lot of signal that gets lost. But you explain your point first.
Well, I think the posting about that does end up being necessary to an extent because if you're not posting about it, the other side's posting about it, and whatever's talked about more gets normalized. Okay, so if you don't have everybody and their uncle posting about, hey, this is treason, this needs to be treason, we need to punish these people, then you're going to have the other side where everybody and their uncle is posting, these are brave patriots, and we need to help protect them from the evil government that's going to come punish them. So it's a catch-22 because, yeah, you know, it does end up just being a big crowd of like, yeah, this is bad. But you need a crowd standing up and saying this is bad because the other crowd is already standing up. So if everybody and their uncle ain't posting about, hey, this is treason, then the one narrative is going to become, and we already know that the Trump people have a social media sort of propaganda machine that is pumping out QAnon and all this shit. So if we don't have average people like us posting saying, you know, we denounce this and what have you, we're going to get drowned out. so
in your estimation, like, do you think that having that level of consistent posting at least like indicates some kind of popular barometer of like what's okay and what isn't?
Well, I think so too. I mean, that's kind of how politics is in general. You know, the people who verbally say I support this thing, you know, that's one side, and verbally say I support this thing is another. And social media is just a different way to express that. So, you know, of course, a lot of people stand up. If we were all in a room together and half of, you know, there was a mob that stormed the Capitol together, of course, you'd very quickly have the two groups of people start separating into different rooms saying this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And whatever group standing in the room is, which is bigger, is going to kind of just de facto be the winner because they're the majority. So you need everybody and their uncle posting about it. You know, it's the same thing with BLM and whatnot. So everybody piped in because they felt like they needed to say, yes, I think Black Lives Matter, because there were a lot of people saying they didn't.
But here's the thing. Right. Is like, I think the catch-22 is a catch-22. And this is what I had trouble explaining over chat that like I've been able to think about now is the problem is the algorithm, and also you're limited by the audience and the friend list, right? So let's say you are a politically engaged person on the internet. Okay, and then you're like me and you don't have any conservative friends on Facebook. Then it's just I see the same thing over and over again. I don't really see anything that contradicts that, but also like I don't have to see anything that makes me upset. Right? But then you take the flip side of like, you know, you're politically active, you're on the, you know, quote unquote left on this one, and you have a lot of conservative people talking on your feed, right? They're still only talking to you on their feed. You don't know who on their side sees what, and based on your privacy settings, you don't see who sees what. And of the people who use Facebook, how many of them openly discuss politics like that? And what's the level of interface? What's the level of interconnection? And this thing of that demographic, how many politically disengaged people are on the platform? We don't know that one. I don't have Jamie on like they do on Joe Rogan who can pull that shit up for me, but I don't think that data exists. I also don't think that, you know, of the people who use social media, how many of them are representative of the general population? And of the platforms they use. So that's where the thing where it's like I see where you're getting at, but that cohort seems to only like incestuously get smaller like when you define it that way, because how many of us use social media to that end?
Yeah, and I wanna so Adi's making the point from, I guess, lack of effectiveness. I want to take it a step further and push it in the other direction. Ryan, I think you have very valid points. I mean, it made me think for quite a few minutes there about maybe that's right. But I also see if it would be one thing if, you know, we had that room set up or we had people making politically apt, reasonable takes. I condemn these actions. This is not who we are. This is something against the Constitution. We should stand for those principles. If everyone said that, I'd probably agree with you. But what you have too often, if you get in too far to the cesspools of Twitter or even Facebook or a lot of other social media platforms, you see people with incendiary takes, people with takes that are unreasonable, people with takes that if somebody from quote unquote the other side saw it, it's going to push them further into their bad beliefs, right? Or their erroneous beliefs. They're going to believe it stronger. It's something in psychology called the boomerang effect. There is a way to combat, and I'm a believer in that. There's a way to combat bad or erroneous takes, unreasonable takes, etc. on social media for a large part of the population, people who are willing to argue in good faith. There's for what it's worth, there are a lot of Trump voters out there who are willing to have a discussion respectfully. Not often do we see, we don't know, you might not always see that. On my social media, I do have quite a few conservative people, and I often engage them in discussion, and usually it's pretty respectful, not always. But I think if you engage somebody with a critical take, it's going to be more effective and avoid that boomerang effect, which ends up working against us. And unfortunately, too often we see those takes on social media being so unreasonable and hostile that it ends up subverting what we want. So it's like a ritualistic, we have to do this, but then it becomes too much. And by too much, I don't mean like I think it's very, very okay and acceptable and awesome to condemn the Capitol riots. But when you make it about something, I've struggled to come up with an example, but when you make it too unreasonable, make it so that this is all about, for instance, this is all a conspiracy, a racial conspiracy, white supremacy. You make every Trump, you say something, oh, all Trump supporters are white supremacists, which too often I see those extremes in the Facebook posts or social media posts, then you end up turning more people away. So Adi made the point from lack of effectiveness. I'm saying it's counter effective sometimes.
Well, I also think there's a problem, like kind of on that point where when you have these kind of political discussions on social media, there's that level of removal of like this being a person, right? So you see the same thing with like road rage, and it's kind of a silly example, but if you're driving a car and someone cuts you off, that you're likely to be a lot more aggressive because you're not seeing them as a person, you're seeing them as a car, right? And kind of same thing with social media. If Zack and I are in a room and we're having a discussion, I'm looking at a human being, and it's a lot harder to say something, highly aggressive or something that could be damaging when I'm looking this person in the face, and that's a human connection. Social media, as great as it is that we can really quickly reach a very large audience, and we connect with so many people that we may not have ever been able to connect with otherwise, it does have that double-edged sword of where you're an icon on a page. You're not a human being all the time. And I think people forget that. So when we get political discourse can already be highly aggressive in person. I've been in my share of conversations that have turned really, really sour with people that I thought cared a lot about me because of politics. And when you add that social media component, that amps it up. I do kind of want to branch this out a little further too, where there is an expectation for everyone to post about every single thing that happens. And if you're the person who doesn't, there is a lot of discourse that says something to the effect of, oh, well, I guess you don't care about it. You're quiet, you don't care. And it's frustrating for me. Like I'm a graduate student and I'm studying public administration. I don't have a lot of time. And I actually work in a job where I do advocacy work, like real, actual advocacy work. And that's not to say social media is fake, but it is to say that when I see someone going, oh, you didn't post about this thing? And I'm like, no, I was busy actually volunteering and doing advocacy work with a nonprofit. Like, can you leave me alone, please? And I think we get a lot of that too, where there's an expectation to post, and if you don't, people make an assumption, and then because you're an icon on a page, they feel like they can attack you, right? And I think that's a really toxic, not to use an overused word, right? But that's like a toxic pathway that I see happen all too often.
No, I agree. And first of all, what those people should do.
Yeah, I agree too.
Thank you for your service. But second, it kind of is a way to buy yourself a little social capital in addition to make you, it feels like you did something when you write a post or because first that I think writing the post has become the ritual for many of us the first time we think about it. I'll admit that about myself, is like I'll see the thing. Sometimes I don't even read the article. That's just how good my prediction is. But I'll come up with the take, and it's like a fire 5-page essay, and I didn't even do that for school, so I don't know why I did stuff like that. But to what you're saying, it's just, it creates this perception that the one who posts is the one with virtue or the one with knowledge. And again, like, the circumstances by which you can do that, I think, are mired by your position, what you can get away with. And I'm talking about, like, more so like with time, with having the time to post, or like having the kind of job or like social standing where you can freely post and not have consequences for it. I know that for a lot of us, we have to limit what we say because of where we work. That's why I'm trying to tone back on some things, but also I just think that some things are better done over voice or over, like, in person. That's why I want to switch to podcasting over posting. One,
I was about to say that. Yeah.
One, because no one reads my posts. Let's be honest there. No, I have some fire tweets, only 3 likes. So I need to get out there, right? But at the
I'm one of those 3. I'm one of those 3 likes,
and I appreciate that. I strongly appreciate everyone who. Thank you for your service, everyone who's liked my tweets. But
shut up.
Yeah, you're welcome, Adi.
But that's
you got to give us that money you promised.
Yeah, eventually I will set up a Patreon, and that 25 cents will be split 4 ways. Don't you worry about it, guys. That's
down.
I mean, that was the initial test name for this podcast, was My Fail Podcast, but we don't need to put all that negativity out there in the world, right? I think that, yeah, it's created this space of, like, people with takes kind of create a personality or ethic around it. And it turns into a way of policing language at times, or even like the kinds of takes you can have. And I think, it's reached a point where, like, the posters with the biggest following and with the strongest feelings about it are in a way self-censoring or trying to police the discourse. And I think that's counterproductive.
See, I guess I'm kind of the one who's like just pose. It's funny, my background in this, I don't post on Facebook ever, really. Like, I actually actively avoid even checking Facebook, except for using it. I've used it to advertise stuff in the past, different like charity stuff I've been doing. But beyond that, I typically like avoid Facebook. I don't have a lot of social medias. I don't post on Instagram. Like, I don't talk about politics on social media. I'm one of those people who maybe people think, oh, he doesn't care, because I never post about anything, right? Like, I remember over the summer, I was a little worried because I was like, I wonder if people know that I support BLM, because I don't really support anything. But then, meanwhile, I showed up
and who you actually are, not like.
Right. Well, and for me, it's important. I talk about it with my friends, and I voice my opinions to my friends, like people who I care about knowing how I feel about issues. I talk to them about it, and I say, here I am. So that's my background. I'm not one of those people who posts whenever shit goes down. At the same time, I guess I just feel like I need to talk about some of the merits, or at least explaining like why people do it. Because people who work 40 hours a week, physical laborious jobs, who are exhausted, do not have the time, money, or power to go to protests, expressing an opinion on social media might be the only way that they have to say, hey, I think this is bad. Hey, I think this is good. So to say that, like, everybody posting about it doesn't... I agree. I 100% agree with what Zack was saying, with what Gabrielle was saying, I saying. You do get these like bad takes from people who are like, we should just kill all the other side. And it's like, that's bad. Like mass murder of a
yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, mass
murder is bad. Hot take here on Adi's podcast, where we don't condone murder here.
Exactly.
I'm gonna go share it on social media, make a Facebook post. It's gonna be awesome, guys.
Right, but in the end, the majority of people, the majority of the time, are doing rational things. And they're saying rational things. Yes, social media tends to really reward and highlight those people with those extreme takes. But me, as a person who works in government, as a person who, tries not to, I have friends on both sides of the aisle. I have, I guess for me, being able to post about something, specifically when it comes to something as extreme as somebody trying to overthrow the democratically elected United States government. There are some things, I guess, especially with this most recent thing, everybody should be on the same page about it. they carried nooses into the Capitol building, zip ties. They were planning on executing every single politician in that building. Mike Pence was going to be murdered. AOC was going to be murdered. Bernie Sanders was going to be murdered. Like, their goal was blood. So the fact that, or at least hostages, which is arguably possibly worse. So, you know, when it comes to things that are so obviously appalling and so obviously bad, it is important, I think, for everyone to, like, I actually posted on social media about this for the first time. I think it's literally my first social media post since I don't think I posted at all in 2020, at least on Facebook. I'm not sure, except for the charity stuff I was doing. But I think it's important to be like, hey, we can't normalize this. We can't accept this. We have to talk about this, and we have to talk about it a lot because, oh my God, that was almost fucking horrific.
But that's what it seems to be coming down to, right? Is that all we can do is talk about it. And I think the question
the four of us sitting here, all we can physically do is talk about it. But our posts create enough outrage to where hopefully politicians will take heed and actually do something about it.
I know, but that's also what I'm getting at, is like, how much more heat from posts are they going to keep feeling? Because that must be a warm room with the amount of posting that's been happening the past 4 years. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, that's a good point. I totally agree.
That's what I'm saying, is I do get, like, initially where you started with this is like, a lot of us, first of all, we're compelled by, like, the conditions we live in. We have to go to work. We have lives. We have people we're accountable to. We have things we, try to do outside of politics that make us normal people otherwise. You know what I mean? So, in that, like, I get what you're saying, is that sometimes all you can do, the only level of engagement the average citizen has, it seems, is the vote. And then if you're old enough and still own a landline for some reason, you get polled. If you're, prior, you'd have people canvass you if you were on a QVF file. And talking about it on social media. With how stratified the media has gotten, I don't think people participate in media regularly. When it comes to polls, I mean, people don't engage polls except for, like, people with landlines, which, who does that anymore? And I think it's that thing where, like, it has that kind of democratizing effect where it becomes the one last forum everyone has to have public discussion. I agree with you on that phase, but, like, it seems, I'm not. Let me find a better word for this. It seems inept and inert. It's like we have all this outrage, and I think it could be collectively done to the betterment of society, or it could be done to do something constructively with this. And the pandemic is a unique thing that stalls that action. That's correct. But on the flip side, it's like all we kind of do is, like, we have that take and we get the likes and everyone's like, damn, you spoke the truth, man, at best, or, like, has a little disagreement with you, or, like, will compound on your point. But there's no call to action on what we can do with this. Like, aside from, the talk about impeaching Trump again in the Senate, or invoking the 25th, or what have you, right? I think, what's the call for everyday people? And I think, like, having a better call to action, like, hey, maybe we start having that conversation about ineptitude, or feeling powerless, because I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day with how these guys acted at the Capitol. Is I think a lot of people feel powerless in the world they live in. Correctly identifying those causes is a lot more effective than what they did, which is incorrectly identify those causes. And that's what needs to happen at the individual level, is addressing the powerlessness we all feel under the system or modern life or what have you. And that's what's getting left out of it, I think, at the basic level. But then also, how do you organize against that kind of force? I don't think that question's being answered in the detail it needs to be answered in.
Well, this is a super complex issue, and it has to go around, it all comes back to having a shared set of facts first. I think that's the first and foremost thing. In online discourse in general, any call to action, there needs to be agreed upon facts or evidence before we can, sometimes, we come to different conclusions. We have different conclusions using the same set of facts. That's fine. That's expected. That's how the political factions used to operate. But um, nowadays, without that, with actors actively spreading disinformation, information meant to mislead for political gain, you have a really hard time. The conclusions aren't just different; they're based wholly on a separate reality, one that isn't reality, but one that is perceived as different. I think without getting that together, I think you're gonna still see this blind tribalism. You're gonna have elected representatives who are not as privy to being influenced by the letter you write them or a social media post, just because there is a good portion of the public and of their voting bloc who is going to vote based on some arbitrary non-reality as opposed to, you know, the facts that you have. Um, and then once you establish that set of facts, which seems very difficult nowadays. you, I heard from a state senator back when we were at Oakland University, involved in the student government, that a well-reasoned letter to an elected representative is more effective than if a random 5,000 people sent them a letter saying vote yes on this. Because if in my view, if it's not 50.1% of their voting block, they're not going to necessarily take action just based on the fact that you're voicing your opinion alone. If it's well reasoned based on and we can have everybody agree on the set of facts, I think that there's a way to take political action. Nowadays, it seems very difficult to do that.
I want to pipe up here too, because I briefly mentioned I work in advocacy stuff, and this is kind of, we train people to do advocacy work, and this is something we talk about a lot. But one of the big things when it comes to contacting representatives is also being able to understand that the actual representative, while they vote on whatever it is, really it's almost more important to get their staff on your side. And that seems kind of ridiculous, right? But the staff do the research, they find the facts, they find the information, and then they're the ones who inform their representative, because one representative doesn't have information about all causes. And so when you have like hot button issues, right, where representatives are going to have opinions, like I'm in New York, they recently got rid of bail for a lot of like minor crimes. And that's something that a lot of Republicans tend to run on as reintroducing the bail. You're not going to really change a Republican's opinion on that. But when it comes to other issues that are less hot button, they don't always know everything about it, and they don't have a stance that's completely formulated on it. And so if you want to have action, it's like you need to have these well-reasoned, thought-out opinions, but sending it directly to that representative almost can be ineffective, because they don't take the time always to read those things, because they're not going to know it, right? Whereas their staff are highly, highly important, and being able to get them on your side or getting them in the room is also really engaging as well. And I think there's this want for us to all be, and this is going to sound like kind of bad, but there's this want for us, like we all want to be important. We all want to feel important. And so if you set up something, you want to set up a meeting with your elected representative, or you get a coalition together to go meet with your representative, and instead you get their staffer, right? And there's this kind of wind that falls out of your movement because, oh, they sent me their staffer, they don't care about this issue. But in reality, that person is probably more important for moving your cause forward than anyone you could have gotten in the room, because they're the ones who do that legwork for their rep. And I don't have a correlated thought, like really to wrap this up like neatly, but I just wanted to kind of add that to the conversation, that I think we think about advocacy and taking action in this like really big way. And sometimes you can do these small things and build these small connections with like people in your community. And then you meet with maybe someone who doesn't seem as important, and you can move, and I say as important with like air quotes, but you can really create big movement if you're willing to take those little steps.
No, I agree with that. And that's kind of, I see how you can wrap this up is with what Zack was saying, is that the one well-reasoned argument, and then what you're saying with meeting, the staffer or the people who hold influence, is what I see that's lacking from the discourse or lack thereof. is this lack of understanding when it comes to power and influence. And I think Ryan, you okay there?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry.
I said power and it just flashed back.
No, something
Power.
fell on my laptop. I apologize.
Oh, no.
Oh, good.
We're good.
Okay, so I think, you know, just as much as it is the one well-argued letter, I think also who sends it matters just as much. And I think the people who put in that legwork at times are often the only people doing it, especially on, I'll say, our side loosely of the, you know, the causes we support. We're a little more loosely organized, and the people who are trying to work within the system get a little flack, but I think they deserve a little credit in this sense. But also, holding the ear of power is a form of power itself, right? And I think that's where it comes to on social media is you can post day and night about it, but what does your individual post on your social media account amount to without influence? Or even if you have a big following, how much influence does it have? And I think,
but like everybody has a little bit of influence, though. Just at least with the people who know them. Like, for example, if like let's say I'm gonna take an issue that maybe none of us know anything about. You guys might know about this, but maybe not. Let's say I came out and I was like, I am really for legalizing unpasteurized milk, like making it so you can just buy the milk straight from the cow in the state of Michigan. Okay, let's say that's an issue.
Instant ban.
Okay, so let's say that's an issue I support. Let's say I have 10 friends on Facebook. That's probably about how many people actually listen to me on Facebook anyway. But 10 friends on Facebook who have no idea about pasteurized milk. Them seeing my post about it might be the first time they ever think about that issue. And so for the rest of the time they think about that issue, they're going to think, oh, well, you know, my friend Ryan, who I trust and think is just a swell guy, he thinks unpasteurized milk is okay. So maybe I should think unpasteurized milk. Like, everybody has a little bit of influence. Even if you have 3 people that interact with your tweets,
Sure.
that's 3
But I
who listen.
think you're giving it a little much credit. First of all, I think you should join the unpasteurized milk movement as an organizer, because you're getting into what I'm trying to get at is, you know, what I think, where I think social media shines, and I'm not saying that it's absolutely garbage. Listen, some of the best top tier dank memes, cat videos, you know, the internet has its uses. Okay, we all watch, you know, we watch dirty things, we watch funny things, but I think what I'm trying to get at is oh boy, give me a second.
While you're thinking about it, Adi, do you mind if I chime in?
Okay, no, I just remembered. I'm sorry. Let me finish this.
Okay.
And I'll jump straight to you.
Sure.
Is, you know, there's a gap between getting the word out and actually doing something about once you get the word out. You know what I'm saying? And I think you're jumping straight to the organized point. Is like, you know, I'll get the word out. 10 people are already on my side. We're gonna start an unpasteurized milk protest, right? I'm saying there's a jump between those two. And let's say you use the tool to get everyone in a little group, and then you set up an event, and then you guys meet up in real life, or you have a virtual meeting to come up with demands in real life. There's a couple steps missing in between then. And I'm saying that the tool is not the problem, but I'm saying that the steps are being missed entirely.
Uh-huh.
No, I totally get what you're saying. I guess what I'm getting at is, though, like, I know I throw around the word normalization a lot, but, like, you know, again, we know that with extremist opinions, there are a lot of people who are going to be piping up about it. There are already people. I've heard people verbally say, oh, well, that's what they get when they try to steal the election from Trump, and, like, shit like that. You know, you hear people say that, and that's leading to a normalization of, oh, what happened on Wednesday is okay. And if you don't have a lot of people who are saying the opposite verbally and very proudly and not backing down from that, then all of a sudden their normal is going to be what's normal. And social media does contribute that a bit. Social media normalizes things. Notice a couple years ago, not to like bring up eating ass on your podcast, but like nobody talked about that at all.
No, I agree what you're saying.
It became a meme, and then once it was a meme, it became a commonly done sex act. So the internet has this power of turning things into normal and making.
I agree. There is someone in the porn industry with an ass agenda. There is one.
Probably.
But okay, but coming to that point though is like maybe in like certain Like, I think in terms of
Content.
representation and like the bill, because what I was trying to get at is it's good as a billboard. Like the Pinterest model is like peak social media. That's what it's supposed to be.
Wow,
And
yeah.
it's in its purest form, and it's as God intended, right? But where I'm getting at this is like, to do politics is different from normalizing something. And let's say, you know, you're talking about extremist opinions, right? I don't think extremism should be frowned upon inherently, because let's say, for lack of a better term, ending slavery was a radical opinion at the time. And a lot of what people were doing back then, a lot of what the anti-slavery movement was doing is, whoa, we can't normalize this. So I think I take issue with the approach there, because, you know, the radicalism is not inherently, like, being radical or being moderate should not be seen as inherently virtuous or not. It's what you do and the ethics of those actions that it comes back to.
Well, that's true. Yeah, certain things should be normalized, absolutely, and it kind of falls on where you are in the political aisle. But, you know, murdering the vice president because the president wants you to, so he can install himself as a dictator, is certainly something that we don't want to be normalized. And I think the majority of people would agree.
But that's what I'm getting at. Is like, go ahead, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah. So, based on, you know, again, I totally understand the point of you want to add more reasoned pieces or more good take pieces of the pie, or you know, to the plate, as opposed to all the bad ones that are out there. I totally get that, but you better make sure that they're well reasoned, because the people who are seeing your post about, for instance, unpasteurized milk, if you start talking about how unpasteurized milk is token white supremacy or something, the 10 people who are viewing your posts, I'm among one of them, are going to start to have the opposite opinion, just because it seems, oh, this is a whole movement now. Is this really? I guess I'm on the other side of that now, and unfortunately, people view things in a kind of a binary way, where it's, you know, this or that, 1 or 0, and it's not like, I try to stay away from that sort of thinking, left or right, you know, Democrat or Republican, and try to have, oh, well, they're right here, there's some merit here, there's some merit, but people in general don't seem to be like that. And my caution for the drive to fight against normalization would be, if you're gonna try to argue something on social media to add a good take piece of the pie to the plate, then make sure it's well reasoned.
Well,
so,
I
don't think it is or most often.
Yeah, I think with that too, and I'm going to harp back on something I mentioned earlier, but just treating people like people is hard on social media. And even if you have that well-reasoned piece of opinion, I think people color movements based on the extremes on either end. And so, you know, if you're posting something really well-reasoned about unpasteurized milk, someone who's already familiar with the movement might be thinking in their head about the extremists who tied it to white supremacy, right? And so even if you have the most reasonable take in the world, their interaction with that is with this viewpoint that they think is really egregious. I also think I use social media. I do it often, and I'm guilty of a lot of things we've talked about today. So like, I don't want to be this person that's like, oh, everybody needs to not do these things, and I'm so great I don't, because I do. I do think, though, that we fall into the trap of, I guess, thinking we're doing more than we really are, and treating other people like they are not people. And then also, I think thinking we understand something because we engaged with it on social media, but we never actually engaged with it in life. And I saw this a lot with the understanding of the BLM protests. Like, I was out in my city, and my boyfriend was out in our city. And even the next day, people who live in the city we're in were sharing news articles about what had happened that evening that were not accurate, and it wasn't reality. And it's bizarre because they thought they had a clear understanding about what happened because they read some posts on social media, they saw a few clips, and now they're like, oh yeah, I totally saw what happened there. And it's like, but you're only gauging it through this filter of social media, and not actually through you seeing it physically in the space. That's just one example, but I think that's another piece of the problem.
Yeah, and I have something to add to that too. I mean, I think this all, and what Gabby was saying, I think this all speaks to the limits of humanity, and how far we've come in our in world history. Really, we still are, I guess, weak, or we will succumb to common political strategies. I mean, I can point to one example. If you've ever had the displeasure of watching Tucker Carlson on Fox News, you know that parading out the extremes and then arguing against that, straw manning, if you will, is
Ben Shapiro's entire affect.
Yeah. Oh, they want to do this. They want to do this. And he just says it fast and over and over. But Tucker Carlson, as the example, he will just parade on somebody who's very extreme, quote unquote, from the left, and allow them to speak. And he looks at them with his dumbfounded stare, and then argues against that. And he says, well, look, this is what the left wants. This is what they want to do. And it is only one person. That, just understanding that as a political or as a strategy used, a rhetorical strategy used, would make it way less powerful. But unfortunately, people don't have that understanding of the rhetorical strategies that are used in politics. I learned this in high school. I don't know why. Maybe that's not something that everybody did, but that is such a crucial civics lesson, at least nowadays when there's so much information going everywhere, that you have to be able to see through the bullcrap, and people unfortunately aren't. And then the second trap is another limit of humanity, is that then the quote unquote the left falls into the trap of having to defend that. You don't have to defend Antifa. Antifa is a loathsome organization. You don't have to defend the extremists on either end. They're not part of you. We're all, or most of us, especially including the politically, the apolitical people, are probably somewhere in the middle of those extremes. And it's better to see that as a group as opposed to left, right. But we can't, unfortunately, because we're tribal beings.
Well, yeah. So if we're gonna start talking about,
and Antifa's not an organization, but I get what you're saying. At is like, you get caught in someone else's premise, and like they've already shifted the goalposts. You don't have to engage that. And I think that's the bottom line. No one is immune to propaganda.
Well, and we want to talk about the limits of humanity here. We could have endless conversations of like the fact that social media has only been around for 2 decades out of the 12,000 years humans have been a thing, and like we're all still learning about how this fucking bullshit works, and like how what are the implications when I could suddenly hit up somebody in Turkey to be like, hey, do you want to follow my candle making business? Like, like there's so much. The social media is such a new fucking concept, like the idea of mass human interaction across the entire planet, that we're just now starting to learn about like what all of the impacts are. Yeah. Like every tweet in theory is going to be there. Like, yeah, it always fucks me up when I look on YouTube. It's like, this video was uploaded 12 years ago. But like eventually there's going to be like, this video was uploaded 100 years ago. And like, that's just going to be a shit that like historians can look at now. So Gabby, I know you have a partial history background too, so I'm sure you've thought about that as well. But
I feel bad for historians that will come into the trade in that period of time, because lost their souls. Everything is a shit. There were debates on where to put Trump's tweets, right? Like, do we log those like while he's president? Like, they're so
put them in the Library of Congress.
Isn't this coming back to like what this age is going to be characterized? Like, it's going to be characterized as an age of just talking and like no real action taken. Like, it was one thing when everyone's like, oh, does Twitter have a right to censor Trump? Yeah, like, okay, I'm not going to engage that discussion and what I think on it right now. But wouldn't it have been a little cooler if Twitter just banned him and then they dealt with the consequences? And I'm not saying that I support that or that's what they should have done, although I am. But I'm just saying that, like, we all got caught up in that discussion for, like, years. And, like, someone could have done something about it by then. Or they could have just taken a strict policy of saying, we're never going to ban anyone's account like that.
That's what Parler does.
They did neither.
Well, that's what Parler does. And now Parler, perhaps accurately, is
but guess what? Like, Parler is that new boogeyman we're supposed to be afraid of. Guess what? They're getting sick of Parler, too. You know what I mean? Where it's like, these standards of speech are nebulously argued by whoever runs the platform, and like you had 4chan and then the exodus from 4chan to 8chan, for them from 8chan to 8 whatever, 16 whatever, 32 whatever. They love 8 bits, but anyways, like that's what I'm saying is like you know, the people who engage in the cancellation of Milo Yiannopoulos was useful or not, and he was definitely like unfunded for a sec, and that's what we wanted for him. But when you look at the fact that he was able to still find his way back to Parler, deplatforming is not as strong the strategy as people think it is. People are always going to find a place to spread whatever they want.
Which kind of gets into this point that I've brought up with so many people. It's like comedians will like I hear like people like Bill Maher and like comedians being like, yeah, Twitter's not real people, or like, oh yeah, fuck social media, who cares about it? But like it's here to stay. Like if it wasn't Twitter, something else would be there. Like Facebook would be replaced by something else. Humans have always wanted this like open forum to share things. So we need to stop. Like I always think it's so funny that so many people are like, look at all these problems with social media, but then so few people are willing to offer like actual solutions of how to deal with the issue and like how to like change the way that we have conversations and stuff. Because like the four of us can like, you know, I love what everybody's talked about today with the four of us, absolutely. But like how to like moving forward, like what do the four of us do? Like what does anybody do to actually change the way we talk about this shit?
Like I think it kind of goes back to that. I don't think there's anything four people individually could really do, right? But it goes back to like what Zack was saying about the education piece and having facts that are all the same. I think that's something that's definitely changed. I've found myself in quote unquote political discussions that are really just me stating a proven thing and someone going, no, and me going, well, I'm not saying like I feel one way or another about it. I'm just saying this is a thing. And then just telling me no.
And people, right. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's not one. So there's the education piece, which is really important, right? But there's also, I think, and this sounds really kind of pessimistic because it's not realistic, but I feel like getting people off of social media and less dependent on it is really the best solution to these issues, because people, whether we like to admit it or not, are very, very dependent on social media. I find myself becoming dependent on it, and I have to actively check myself to make sure I don't, right? There's that piece. And I think as long as we can build a coalition of people, basically an echo chamber around us, and have all this content that we agree with and feel validated by it, and, you know, get that little shot of ego every time we post something that people like, that's so inherently something people love that. And I think it's a very individual responsibility for people to step back and realize, like, this shouldn't be my life. I shouldn't wake up in the morning and immediately pick my phone up and try to figure out what everybody thinks and what everybody thinks about me.
Right.
It's unrealistic, and I know that, but I do think it comes down to personal responsibility a little bit. Like, I can't control what any of you do on social media or how much you depend on it, but I can control how much I'm impacted by it.
I think I'm in that same boat, and I think Ryan said this sometime in the first half of the podcast so far, that we've all kind of erected like standing barriers of our use of social media, and whether it's posting on Facebook or staying away from it. Twitter, my worst enemy, Twitter. I've also had to do that for the sake of my own, you know, mental well-being, so they don't get so pessimistic about the world. But I think that's an interesting phenomenon that's probably happening and has happened over the last several years. You had social media as it started, and everybody was basically just talking, sharing memes, and occasionally maybe there's a political post, but you didn't really talk about it that much. And then everybody joined social media in the world, and now it seems to me on my feed it's almost nothing but political. There's like a dog picture, and then it's somebody's bad political take, like the dog pictures. But as more and more people try to stay away from political social media, you have the people left who are, or the people remaining who are still enjoying posting all those bad takes. So it's almost like saturated by all awfulness. Which I don't know if there's a way to combat that, or if we even should. Maybe we should all limit our social media use. But I just wanted to point out that interesting phenomenon. I thought maybe others have noticed that.
Well, we're not
For anyone interested in emailing Zack dog pictures, please just tag the podcast and send it.
Yeah. Follow us on Facebook, the social media we're trying to tell you to get off of at Greenhouse Gaslighting.
Right, yeah.
And follow us on Twitter, another platform we're trying to get you off of, on at Pod Greenhouse.
Yeah.
But I think so. We're not the first people to have this conversation. I'm really inspired by. I really follow Chapo Trap House and Bad Faith. These are two I recommend all my listeners. But Matt Crispin was invited to a discussion on Jacobin, and I forget if it was him or one of the other guests, but the discussion was again about politics on social media, and as a leftist, what's your use of it? And someone said something that I think was it was pithy, but I think it made sense. Is whether or not you can actually log off, you need to log off in your heart. And I think that's what it comes back to, is like, this is a very alienated sphere of discussion. It's virtual. And I think it's a symptom of the times where like, it's all we have, and how we, let's say in a post-COVID society, like, do we have more amphitheaters? Do we have more public forums? Is that a normalizing or moderating effect? I don't know, but I think that's the first step, right? Is, shift back from political discussion on social media to in person. And I think a lot of people feel that sense of, they watch CNN or MSNBC, or they see the established forums of discussions, and they don't see their opinions or themselves represented in that. And I think shifting back away from the internet to maybe in person is a good way to do that. Whether, at a community level, we have public forums to talk politics and maybe hopefully keep it civil, or maybe you have more involvement in political organizations, whether it's, the DSA, your local Democratic Party chapter, or, an issue advocacy group that you support. I think those are better ways to get that outrage out, because I think people have transitioned from being informed to being outraged and not knowing what to do about it. And I still think it's okay, because the bulletin board effect of social media is its strength. You see new things and you can choose to learn or just react. But people, I think there's a genuine yearning, especially in the current moment, to do something about it. And that energy is going nowhere, and it makes people anxious. It makes people prone to do bad things, or on the flip side, it makes people feel hopeless.
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of our. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I want to point out that I feel like a lot of our discussion, whether we mean it to or not, feels very centered on younger people's use of social media, and maybe that's just my read, but it feels like that's the way that younger people use it. And I think there's a big glaring piece where the way older people use and engage with social media is, I think, I'm going to say this, much more dangerous than the way that, like, young people, we have a different relationship with it, but older people, I find them becoming radicalized, I think, a lot faster, whether for the quote unquote good or bad of it. But I just want to point out that I think it's an entirely different discussion about how social media impacts older generations versus younger generations.
Oh, I agree 100%. I still remember so clearly sitting with my 75-year-old coworker and teaching him, like, trying to teach him when he reads news articles, or like when he reads different, like, even just dumb stuff on the internet, trying to teach him what advertisements are, because like he didn't fully realize that, like, the articles that are like, you'll never believe how this celebrity looks 10 years later. Like, he didn't realize that, like, some company was just trying to advertise that to him. Like, he didn't realize
7 inches to your tiny dingus, old man. That's right. With Blue Man Boner pills.
His brain is just like, oh yeah, I'll engage with that. Absolutely. Like, he doesn't even second guess to think that maybe that's bullshit, just trying to get him to click on it.
And so that's how he ends up with malware all over his computer.
Malware and boner pills that don't work.
I what my grandma's laptop used to look like. Good lord.
And then grandsons like us, grandsons and granddaughters like us, have to deal with it.
This is how we get.
Download malware bites. Free trial.
This is how we get them off the internet. We get older people off the internet by giving them malware, by not teaching them how to use it, and then they can't be radicalized because they all have malware.
But the thing, they download this malware, then they get health problems. Health insurance is too hard to get in America, so they go to Q because apparently Q is releasing the cure to boner cancer. And then their kids see their grandpa with boner cancer and struggling to make ends meet. They vote Bernie, and this, it's just ratchets, doesn't it? Well, I think that's how it works. That's got.
Well, are you trying to bully older listeners?
While it's important, it's important to note that there is with younger people, I guess you tend to have an understanding of technology, and I think that adds to overall, an understanding that there are sources not to be. Seen as credible over social media. I think there's definitely a tendency there, but I want to also say that I don't think that all age groups are immune to that sort of thinking. Although we might not as much click on bad advertisements. We are probably close to equally prone to clicking on a bad news article that's a propaganda piece, whether it's progressive propaganda. Because that exists. I mean, or Trump propaganda or everything in between. There is something that will confirm your beliefs and something that is not worthy of your belief. But like I said, will seek to draw you in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly. I think a lot of the things we've talked about like social clout and like the way that people engage with social media is coming from a lens of like how we see it as, between the ages of 20 and 30. I'm just kidding, just to be as broad, but people in their 20s, right? Like we're people in our 20s, and like we're, I think, talking about social media in a way that we engage with it and the way we see our friends engage with it. And I just think that we're just as likely to do all the shit we were talking about earlier, I think is likely for younger people. And I think for older people, the way I see them engage with it is kind of akin to what Ryan was talking about, but less extreme, right? You have not necessarily like everybody's confused about the idea of advertisements, but I do see people in like my dad's age group, and he's, I think, a lower end boomer, maybe an early Gen X. I'm not sure. But he has a very hard time with understanding the difference between like a legitimate post and a not, right? And like, not to say that young people are immune to that, because we're not, but I see my mother shared a blatantly false post, and I was like, what even is this? And it was talking about AOC being like a fascist or something. Like it was like talking about her being far right, and I was like, that is just like blatantly untrue. And I realized it was a Tumblr post. I'm like, you just shared a Tumblr post to your Facebook page, like as news. Right. And like, there's no processing there to think like, oh, this is less valid than writing. Like other pieces of media, right? This is just as, or they have maybe a problem with the difference between like an opinion piece, like the Daily Wire, like share from the Daily Wire versus like I share an NPR article and they're like, well, here's my rebuttal to that. And I'm like, well, that's an opinion piece. Like I shared just a flat article that had information. That's awfully
convenient, you liberal.
Yeah. Here's where I find
but there's a real problem with that. Writing, even typeface writing on social media is kind of sacred. It's throughout history, and I'm sure maybe you know this, Gabby, or my other friends who have studied parts of history. I know one of my majors being, for whatever reason, at the university level, Spanish language and literature, the other one being public administration. I learned a lot about Spanish history, but for a while there in Spain, you only had religious texts, the Bible, and maybe scholarly works related to the Bible were the only things that were allowed to be written, published, posted, printed. And then inevitably it switched from religious, those religious texts, scholarly religious texts, to El Cid, which was a Christian hero, basically still super religious and still super sacred until, on and on to everything else. But that idea that writing is sacred kind of still exists because people are so prone, and you could maybe conceivably see that the church there was concerned about, the spread of knowledge that wasn't favorable, because people believe what is written. I saw something on social media I know it was a couple years ago, but it stuck out in my head. One of my favorite coworkers from when I was working in my last full-time government job, and it just said it was a purple or pink background, maybe magenta background with white text. Is one of those like things that those Facebook posts that are like, "See me, please." And it said, in a 5-4 landmark Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court struck down Obama's attempt to institute Sharia law in schools. And that's being shared, like Gabby said in her previous example, as news. And because it's written down, it's almost like there's a lack of understanding that that's not news. That's just blatantly false.
Well, it's also done on purpose, though, too.
Well,
like, I remember...
I would argue it goes back, I mean, because you're saying it goes far back as text, right? Is like, if it's written somewhere, it's got to be true. And if it's like a prepared infographic, I mean, you see news sites share those kind of prepared infographics all the time, right? But I'd say, I mean, it's been around since the age of radio and TV, right? Where I'm not sure if in the radio age this was common, but I mean, you look on cable news today, and it's like opinion and fact is like done at the same time, even unless it's like the nightly news, and even then, nightly news, you're not immune to propaganda. They can slip one in on you, and you don't know what you're seeing. But with MSNBC's like 12-hour lineup of just commentary on commentary on commentary, and 1 hour of like nightly news, you're getting a bit of opinion with the news you watch every time. And like the same with Fox News. It's like whether you're watching, I mean, Bill O'Reilly was the peak of this, right? But like you got Hannity, you got Tucker Carlson, all these guys, right? And they're doing their reporting with their own opinion and recommendation. And the objectiveness of news has been lost for a moment, in my mind at least. Like people have been seeing unobjective news for a while now.
Oh, absolutely. I think that Fox News is to blame for America's current social media.
I would say MSNBC and CNN too, because like,
Fox started it, and everybody else was like, "Oh, we could do this too." Like, it's done on purpose. Like, I mentioned Mo Brooks and Matt Gaetz earlier, but like you have Congressman Devin Nunes, who in his book, like, I forget the name of the book, but like blatantly says like, yeah, one of the beauties of social media is how easily we can manipulate people with it. And it's like, so you have active members and like mechanisms in the United States government who are using social media, using cancel culture, which I will still assert the first ever example of cancel culture was the Starbucks cups thing. But anyway, you have like people who are using these tools and using all the problems that we've talked about already. They're doing it on purpose, and they want it to be this divisive. They want it to be aggressive. They want it to be extremists on either side going back and forth because it's easier for them to stay in power the more divided we are.
So hear me out. What if we got out?
But how? Because even if you don't have a Facebook page in your business, you're screwed. There's no way you're selling stuff.
That's fair.
If you're a politician and you're not campaigning on Twitter, you're screwed. There's no way you're getting elected.
No, it's gotten to the point of like, the use of social media.
We're dependent on these.
You're right. Like we are so enmeshed, and it's gotten to the point where like, if you're not on social media, people actually wonder, like, dude, are you okay? Like, I haven't seen you post in a minute. Are you alive? Like,
I want to state too that the biased nature and the infusion of entertainment with news into the mainstream media organizations. I mean that goes far back as well. That's not just Crossfire on Fox News. I mean, you're talking
those old
like
World War II
1987 yeah. Gary Hart. You're talking how they delved into his personal life when they never had before. You're talking Dan Rather getting removed from ABC News, I believe it was, for his investigation into George Bush at I think Texas National Guard. This stuff, the corporately owned media, often a fair criticism. It comes from what many of us would consider the other side, that being Trump and friends and friends. But there's at least some truth to that criticism, and that criticism, I think, goes way earlier than early Fox News entertainment. But I'm sure Fox News for sure, and all the other organizations now on MSNBC, CNN, all have that 24-hour news cycle bias and worrying conflation of news and entertainment. and I think that's part of the puzzle. Getting rid of that. It should just be objective, boring news. That's what I want.
I guess you're right.
And everything can be boring.
You know, those old timey movies, or like when they have those flashbacks, they'll go to the movies to watch the news, and it's like World War II has started, and like I guess it's always been around to some extent now, hasn't it?
Well, I think too, and this is something that I know everyone has talked about before, but it also, the one big benefit of social media, right, is that any topic can become important, right? So you do have a lot of this pieces of things that I never knew about, right? That social media opened my eyes to, because I grew up in rural Michigan in a school that in a county that wasn't particularly progressive or diverse or interested in either of those things. And so, social media has been what was that?
You grew up in the boonies, if you will.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And my school was like the most it was like the most advanced. All right. We were like the school of choice. Okay. In my county. So I look at this kind of thing and I realize like social media really did open my eyes to a lot of things I didn't necessarily know about. Now, with that information, I got a degree in history. We briefly mentioned this. I went out and tried to learn information about it from a source that wasn't social media. And I think all too often people learn about information, but they basically stop at reading a Twitter thread or reading a Facebook post. And they're like, oh, cool, social media opened my eyes to this thing and I care about it now. But like, they're missing that step of like, well, now you should probably understand it in a deeper way, right? Like, we don't do that. I want to give social media the credence of like, hey, this is, how do you use the phrase, I'm not going to be able to say it correctly, but democracy and thought and all of that.
Democratizing, is that what I said?
Thank you, democratizing. My brain could not formulate how to say the word. I was like, I'm going to butcher this. I'm just going to say a bunch of syllables. It's going to sound like soup.
That's what speaking.
And I think there's a lot of merit to that.
I think, so we've talked about pretty extensively how, you can't escape social media. Okay, especially we look at Gen Z. Gen Z is very much like the future of social media. They're on it constantly. We're not getting off social media. So the next question is, well, what do you do to make it so social media isn't this vile, toxic place of just bullshit and no goodness, especially when you have people who are actively trying to use the confusion of social media to their own political advantage and to try to spread these very radical ideas of, hey, maybe overturning the government isn't too bad of an idea. You have people purposefully trying to spread toxic information like that. And I'm not an expert. I'm not. I think there's some things that could certainly be done. I think reinstituting, because the 80s, Zach, you referenced before that the news started getting biased and mixing entertainment back in the 80s. Well, that's because in the 80s, that's when Ronald Reagan deregulated the way that news had to be done. It used to legally be required where you had to talk about both sides fairly. You had to talk about, if you talked positively about one side for 20 minutes, you were legally required to talk positively about the other side for 20 minutes. And so that was deregulated, and that's where we kind of saw the shit start to happen. I'm not saying reinstituting that's going to fix all the problems, because it won't. I'm also in favor of just banning 24-hour news cycles and just making it so the news has to be 3 different points throughout the day, and just has to be normal television in between that. There's other stuff you can do. It's a very touchy road for me to be because I find myself often getting news from Deutsche Welle and BBC, which are government funded, but other nations' governments funded things. And I'm not saying America needs a government funded newspaper, but I think more regulation of the newspapers by the governments to make sure they aren't spreading bullshit is important. And I think that needs to go over to social media too. In the end, Facebook right now is a private industry and they can control who posts and what is posted on their thing. I think having the government have a little bit of say in that and be no, you shouldn't be allowed to. Also breaking up the social. There's a million conversations of how we solve this, but I think it's important we have these conversations about how do we move forward and fix this shit.
As long as it's moving forward with the understanding that free speech is sacred and that we don't want to censor without good cause, without a compelling reason, any sort of viewpoint or opinion. But I agree. I'm a little fuzzy on the exact details of the deregulation, but some balancing might do good. It probably depends on the proposal. Some anti-Sherman. We have these huge corporate, what was it? At one point, we had Disney owning a lot of the news. I know at least ABC.
I think
there were others.
Control all the major news outlets.
Yeah, and regardless of what you think about, it's just freedom of contract. There's a problem with a corporation which has its own profit motives putting news in front of the populace. I mean, you're gonna have ulterior motives there. That's just the nature of the profit motive. Profit motive is a good thing, but when it's used in a public service, you start to get into a gray area there. So I totally agree. I would probably agree with some degree of regulation as long as we treat free speech as sacred too.
Well, I agree with you there, but I think it runs a little deeper. Is that maybe some things don't need to be left up to the market, and I think to have a fair and unbiased press, maybe at least part of it is like if you leave it up to the market, it has to stay entertaining to compete. Otherwise, it'll get drowned out by entertainment media because it's competing with entertainment media. So either news, first of all, putting news in its own market, I don't think is going to help. But it has to be one of those things where like either media stays publicly funded or there's no bar to entry. I'm not sure how to implement this either, but I think the framing should be that certain things that are essential for a democracy, if you believe in that, and I think everyone here does to some extent, is, you cannot leave the tools that uphold it up to the market. And the media is part of that. And I think leaving it up to profit corrupts it to some extent.
Well, the only thing more frightening than leaving the free press up to the market is leaving it up entirely to the government too.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree with that. I'm not sure.
I knew that would get some uproar, but hang on, bear with me. So, especially considering who is in the current administration, right? But furthermore, if both of those things are frightening, and to what degree we can debate on and on endlessly, maybe it should be in neither the market nor the government's absolute control. Maybe a divided.
I agree. I agree with that 100%. Like, it should not be in anyone's control, but how that would play out, I also don't know how to answer that one.
Yeah, I was gonna, Zach, actually, before you said anything, I was gonna preface my thought with, at risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I don't think it's a good idea. As someone who aspires to work in nonprofits and government, and also you guys have similar backgrounds, so I think we're all in a similar space, but government, like, we like to think it functions in this pretty, like outside of, if you parson out the elected officials and then like your administrators, we like to think behave in a much less political way, and that's just, we're learning not the reality, right? Like they are very political. They are very they use small influences in order to gain control, just like everybody else. It is not this fix, be all end all kind of fix it solution, and I don't think there's an easy answer. I agree with all of you. There is no easy answer for where news should be. I do agree with both ends that full government control doesn't make sense, and also full private control doesn't make sense. I'm a nonprofit nerd. My brain goes nonprofits, but then we have a problem with that, with philanthropists who have a lot of money funding nonprofits and then have unwarranted control over that piece. So it's very difficult.
Seems like we're a pretty public administration or political science oriented group. I know from my public administration background, both graduate and undergraduate, and I'm sure a lot of you from both your graduate and undergraduate, if applicable, degrees, that there isn't just full government control and laissez-faire market control. There are several steps in a spectrum in between. There's government contracting. There's funding, like you think DTE, Detroit Edison, who's got basically a government contracted monopoly. You have loose government regulations. I mean, you could have, for instance, we have the FCC, right? President appoints the FCC as officers, and they serve a certain term, and they're basically away from political power pressures, they're somewhat preserved from removal. I think it's good by good cause they can be removed by the president, but only that. And they set regulations regarding communications, and I believe social media and mass media would fall under that.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's many more that I have not mentioned, and I'm wondering if some degree of meshing to where it's kind of outside of the current regime in power, because we don't want people like Donald Trump, or if you're on the other side, you don't want someone like Joe Biden controlling the media. And I think both takes are valid.
Well,
for me,
that's what I was
the
going
ideal system is like privately owned news with heavy government regulation that's insulated from political influences.
Well, so
there's a problem with that too, though. Oh, sorry, Adi.
Well, I don't want to like hog the spot, but like I did want to get like to what you guys are saying is that it's useful to look at politics from a power and influence standpoint and not necessarily from ideology. That gets you more useful conclusions. But also, like, even if it was a clearly defined ownership, like private ownership versus state run, I mean, if you look at some of the lead up to the Iraq War, is you had direct lines from the Bush administration to the press, and like those are the non-formalized connections we talk about. So even though like we talk about state-run media as that, oh, the government literally owns the office of the press or something like that, there's also non-tacit or not like non-clear connections that happen at times too. So those need to be exposed or clearly defined when we have that discussion as well.
Yeah, on that, I love the discussion of like networks and informal connections, because they're always going to exist because we're social creatures, right? Like that's just like a reality that we have to live with. It's very good in some senses and it's very bad in others. I do want to mention too, in terms of this conversation around the media and where it should sit and how it should be run, right? We kind of want to insulate it from elected officials because we've seen how it can go negatively, right? But on the same hand, there's like a lot of discussion in like public admin spaces about the role of accountability in terms of the idea, right, is that elected officials carry out the wants and needs of the people they represent. And they're supposed to keep public administrators who are shielded from that, right, by being appointed and not being threatened of, they don't have to be threatened with their position every time there's an election and spend their time and energy doing that. But there's an expectation that these elected officials carry out their constituents' whims and oversee these administrators. And so I think if you segregate that too much, if you kind of pull away from that too much, you have a potential problem of that one accountability measure, which already is not well used and not effectively used most of the time, if we're being real, being threatened as well. So it's I don't have an answer, obviously, clearly. It's just really precarious, and I wanted to bring that up about how elected officials are meant to be a form of accountability measure.
It is whatever solution eventually ends up getting worked out, because this will eventually get fixed. That, or maybe every modern nation in the world will fall apart. Who knows? But a solution will be found to this whole conversation of, how do we make social media more fair, less toxic? How do we stop social media from spreading lies and misinformation and manipulating people? In that conversation, it is a very tenuous balance between elected officials having control, non-biased public administrators having control of the way things work, private industry being the ones actually organizing these social media sites and stuff. Because in the end, Mark Zuckerberg is a private individual. He started a company. That's him. How do all those different players and pieces fall into place? And in the end, it's a balance is the key. And the main problem with the United States, and not just the United States, but I think it's predominantly the United States. The United States is horribly out of balance right now when it comes to politics, when it comes to culture. We have very few balances at this point in the United States. And we are having problems trying to find any sort of balance. And so it's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to eventually work out that balance. But what we're doing right now is not sustainable. It's not going to be.
Balance with what? Balancing what?
Well, the balance between public control, elected officials being able to control social media, and then private industries who are funding and trying to make money off of being social media. Finding a balance between those three different factors is going to be tricky, and it's something that hopefully gets worked out soon, because good Lord, this is not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can derive some wisdom from founding fathers and the way they set up our government with um, the
Checks and
separation of power. Oh, absolutely, checks and balances, separation of powers, making sure that how the historically ever prevalent at the time autocrat or monarch didn't consolidate all of the power, because that was problematic. That was less, I don't want to say less stable, because that was a form of government at the time that was well understood, um, but definitely cause of a lot of strife. And our government was designed as a response to that, and has existed as a response to that with some oscillations. Um, but the three branches and the dual federal state sovereignty existing as a check on any one party, faction, person gaining too much power, maybe that's an applicable lesson here with all the different actors that you've mentioned, where the elected official appoints some officer who is somewhat insulated, like the FCC. The FCC passes content neutral, or as content neutral as they can be, restrictions, and they should be free to do that. And then the private actors work in that space. The thing where I can see you, I think you alluded to, of being out of balance is the perhaps the private actors hold too much influence, campaign donations, controlling content.
The private actors hold all the influence, which is not, again, just not sustainable.
Well, I would just argue we need to kind of rewrite the system a little bit. I think, the compromises that were put into it at the Constitutional Convention just do not meet the that's actually a good question you brought up in the chat. Is the FCC director did threaten net neutrality. That is correct.
He did eliminate net neutrality.
But here's the thing about the director of the FCC and like how it's more important to look at influence and power rather than ideology at times. Ajit Pai was the FCC director under Trump. He is a holdover from the Obama administration and was appointed for his confirmation by one Mitch McConnell. So, and keep in mind, Obama let the appointment go through in the assumption that it would be good faith that he could buy with the Republicans. And we know how Obama's presidency worked out. All that attempt to buy goodwill from Mitch McConnell's, willingness to, not cooperate didn't work out for them as well as they thought it would, to be honest.
Go ahead. Yeah, so now we're getting to the part where we're maybe arguing less structurally and more politically. A lot of people, not necessarily me, but a lot of people would argue that, well, that's just a political question. That's just a political disagreement. That FCC commissioner or director and the commission came up with something that maybe a lot of people don't agree with, but that's what they thought was the right thing. Well, so the check is appointing someone who thinks differently, and then they're insulated for 4 or 5 years from the political process and can make those decisions freely.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is Ajit Pai was a former AT&T lobbyist, if I'm recalling this correctly.
I think that's right.
And at the recommendation of telecommunications donors to Mitch McConnell's re-election campaign, as well as Obama's as well. Obama and Romney both took a lot of money from AT&T. So to keep this in mind, AT&T, while it may not act politically in obvious ways, they would like influence from whoever's in power. That's what we come into with campaign finance, and we can enter that discussion another time, right? But I think what you suggested in the chat is like maybe the FCC needs to have more teeth, or maybe there needs to be more checks and balances within the system, right? That's one way to look at it. But I think in terms of the influence theory I'm trying to get out there is that, Obama lets this pass and he's basically saying, yeah, I'm okay with an FCC head who's willing to deregulate the industry somewhat and have some of these, democratizing foundations of the internet be removed. and then you have Trump basically accepting it for the layup. So that's really what I'm getting at is, it's multifactorial. We have, not only the individual level of us being, prone to our base instincts on social media, but we also have, people who want influence and power in the system to, either raise their profit motive or influence policy. They also act in these ways, and it trickles down.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess getting this back to where we started with, because I know we're approaching the end here, but going back to what we were going on with, like, is it helpful? Or I guess the question we were asking is, what is social media's effect on politics? I guess my summation is that, yes, there's the little guy who, I say little guy, but there are the individuals who post, their opinions, their takes. Some of which are well rational, some of which are rather extreme. You got the individual who's posting because maybe that's the only way that they feel like they can get, that they can get their opinions out there. Maybe they can't show up to the protests. You have people who actively avoid social media, individuals like myself who go out of my way to avoid. I'll read and I'll like political things, but I don't like put my own takes out there. You have people like that. And then you have people who are actively manipulating, spreading false information on purpose because they know they want to advance their own political interests. Essentially, what I'm trying to get at by just listing all these different factors, social media is like the new frontier. It's the Wild West right now. And pretty much if you're a guy with a lot of influence, you control a lot of the power on social media. And you got people shooting each other left and right. You got the saloons getting stuck up every other day. You got accusations of crime and against everybody, and you have people still trying to say the landings are fake. So it's like, so social media is a wild mess right now. And my overall recommendation for the dear listener is that make sure you're not on social media constantly. And when you see an opinion or you see a take, do your own independent research. Get out there, share your opinion if you feel like you need to, but do it in a way that's productive, healthy, and can actually forward the conversation.
Absolutely, that's taking words right out of my mouth. And just to add to that, look for not just what, but how and why. What is someone saying is right in front of you. That's surface level. How someone is saying something. Are they listing something? Are they using tons of exclamation points? Are they posting an opinion piece? What's their rhetoric, and why are they doing it? If it's Tucker Carlson, is he doing it because corporate told him to? Is he doing it because he has a political agenda he wants to? What's it called? Advance. Is Trump saying Little Marco because it's memorable and because that brands the candidate as something negative? Absolutely.
Come on, Zack. It was funny. It was funny when I called him Little Marco.
Oh no, I've awakened him. But we're seeing social media as I think that's very apt, Ryan, to put it as a new frontier, and it's an amplification. It's an amplification of things that already existed. It's an amplification of tribalism. It's an amplification of awareness and good intentions. It's an amplification of all the bad too. And so, dear listener, while we navigate this, let's navigate it together.
I agree with you guys all, and I think a lot of these things are. I think some of these things are feel like common sense, but when you're actually out in the new frontier, right, it's a lot harder to actually apply them. And I want to acknowledge that because, again, I find myself struggling with that sometimes. But I want to, as much as I agree with both of you, I also want to say, I want people to take care of themselves. Social media makes me feel like trash a lot of the time, and I don't think that's an uncommon feeling, right? It's not I would venture to say it's not a space that's good for people's mental health a lot of the time. I don't think it's almost like constant competition a lot of the time. There's a lot of negativity in these takes that are meant to be really aggressive. And I think if people maybe when they felt themselves feeling that stress build, step back and let themselves breathe and be away from it for a minute and then came back into it, I think that would do a lot for these kind of conversations as well, right? Like it would make these conversations a little more productive. So it would have this overall better effect, I think, but also just a very personal better effect for people, because it's a lot of information and you're being bombarded with it all the time. And you're having, I mean, I logged on after the stuff, getting back to the original question Hadi had posed, but after what happened on the 6th with the insurrection, our capital being stormed, no big deal. And it wasn't just stuff about that, but I had a lot of things on my feed that were like, while this is happening, make sure you're also paying attention to these things happening around the world. And I'm like, wow, I can't do this right now. Like, I need to turn this off. Like this, because everyone doesn't want to be lost in the noise. So then they're, of course, pushing the thing that they find to be more important, which is great. But I found myself becoming very overwhelmed. And then I felt guilt for walking away from social media during this really big time when I felt like I should be engaging. But it's not wrong to walk away feeling more comfortable and like you're not going a little crazy, right? So that's my add-on. That's something slightly different from what both of you were saying. I agree with both of you for sure. Especially love the saloon Wild West example. Like, gives me a lot of fun imagery. But spaghetti western,
good imagery. The world building.
Yes, thank you, Ryan.
Well, I mean, it's literally, it's an unregulated, uncensored, wild fucking West out there, and if you're not careful, you might just end up in a showdown at high noon that you don't want to be a part of. So just be careful out there, folks.
Very good takes brought up by everyone, and I'm going to just social media does have that effect, and it does lead to that zero-sum game for attention. And I'm more of a person who believes that everything is everything and everything's interconnected, and you can't just specialize on certain issues or view one thing as the silver bullet solution. Everything has to be holistic, even if that's your perception of the world or how you read the news, right? And I recommend for anyone who, like me, was a leftist, paranoid, and really traumatized by social media as a concept and always feeling anxious about everything. Seriously, start following Chapo. Matt Christman is a co-host there, and he has a wonderful series called The Kush Vlog. If you pull up the episode titled Mind Force Fibonacci Sniper, he explains his philosophy of Grill Pill, which is don't just apply yourself to getting worked up on social media because you clearly have something you want to do. Go back into things that bring you joy first, and then use that as your avenue. So if you're passionate about gardening and then you want to start a community garden and then get involved with that as a way to help your community, and then turn that into a deeper cause of care for, food supply activism and making sure that, a problem that we don't talk about a lot is how food deserts are very common in urban communities, right? And that's a direct way to care about it, because now you're not just hollow pointing, your concern on social media. Now you have a stake in the game, and that gives you influence. That's the back end of how you get influence and power, is your personal connection to it, I think, is what's going to give you strength as someone trying to do something positive in the world. I think that's the wholesome note we can end this on, right? Is find something that matters to you and then do what you can to make it better. That gives you a buy-in that, the people we see as currently holding power have, acquired through money or through influence or through connections with power. And I think us genuinely caring is our strength. So thanks again, guys, for all your help. Follow us on Twitter, the social media we're trying to get you off of on
Come back Greenhouse.
Look us up on Facebook as Greenhouse Gaslighting. I don't have the YouTube channel up yet. Shoot, I'm gonna have to do that tonight. But this was a fun time, guys. Hopefully we can get back, the four of us, to maybe continue this discussion or talk about something else.
Talk about cancellations, maybe cancel culture.
Ooh, that's the discussion that never ends, right? Maybe
the cancellation, or maybe even if we talk about media, not social media, but like literal media and things related to politics. Fun. I'm like so into that, and I think it's fun. I'm a big old anime nerd, so and movie nerd. So here we go.
Come back next week when we cancel Adi Tawari.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're gonna do.
It's funny because in group chats, every time I present a controversial opinion, I'm always like, I don't know, cancel me. And I didn't realize how many people are going to take that as a genuine challenge. So
we'll find something. We'll find
How many
something.
people here take that as a general challenge?
Ooh, 3 for 3. That would be unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right. Have a
All right.
good one, guys.
Thanks, Adi.
Stay safe, listeners.
Here's how we going, folks.